Hey, beautiful people. Welcome back to Ancestors' Voice. Before we dive into tonight's incredible story, I just want to take a moment to say thank you for being here and supporting this channel and for keeping these important stories alive. Now, before we begin tonight's journey, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know what topic you'd like me to cover next, whether it's forgotten heroes, cultural traditions, or untold stories that shaped our world. Your voice guides this channel's direction. Tonight, we're stepping into the smoky, jazz-filled apartments of 1920s Harlem, where survival met celebration in the most ingenious way imaginable. This is the story of rent parties, and trust me, what happened behind those doors will completely change how you think about community, creativity, and resilience. Picture this. It's a Saturday night in 1925, and you're walking down Lenox Avenue in Harlem. The summer air is thick and humid, clinging to your skin like velvet. Street lamps cast golden pools of light on the sidewalk, creating a warm glow that seems to pulse with the rhythm of the city. From every other brownstone, you can hear it. The unmistakable sound of piano keys dancing through the night air, accompanied by bursts of laughter, animated conversation, and the rhythmic stomping of feet on wooden floors that makes the entire building seem to vibrate with life. The sounds spill out of open windows and doorways, mixing with the clip-clop of horse-drawn carriages and the occasional rumble of automobiles. Children dart between the legs of well-dressed adults, their laughter adding another layer to the symphony of Saturday night in Harlem. Women in drop-waist dresses and long pearl necklaces navigate the sidewalks with practiced grace, while men in suspenders and bow ties tip their hats and call out greetings to friends and neighbors. You pull a small, hand-printed card from your pocket, a piece of paper that's been folded and unfolded so many times the creases are permanent. It reads in elegant handwriting. Shake it and break it, hang it on the wall. Come to my house party and we'll ball them all. Saturday night, 9 p.m., 50 cents admission. Good music, better food, best time guaranteed. The card is decorated with little musical notes drawn in ink, and at the bottom, an address. 435 Lenox Avenue, apartment 4B. This little piece of paper is your passport to one of Harlem's most fascinating cultural phenomena, the rent party. It's more than just an invitation. It's a lifeline disguised as entertainment, a survival strategy wrapped in celebration. But these weren't just parties. They were economic engines. They were community builders. They were cultural laboratories where some of America's greatest art forms were born. They were lifelines. To understand why rent parties became so essential, you have to understand what Black families in Harlem were facing. This wasn't just about high rent. This was about systemic exploitation wrapped in the promise of the American dream. Black tenants were required to pay significantly higher apartment rent than white tenants for apartments that were smaller, more cramped, and often in worse condition. We're talking about paying double, sometimes triple, what white families paid for similar spaces downtown. And this was all while making considerably less money due to employment discrimination that kept Black workers in the lowest paying jobs. The numbers are staggering when you really think about them. While Manhattan in the year 2000 had a population density of about 70,000 people per square mile, Harlem in the mid-1920s crammed an incredible 215,000 souls into each square mile. Let that sink in for a moment. 215,000 people per square mile. Imagine that density, that humanity packed into every available space. Families were squeezed into what they called railroad apartments, long, narrow spaces where rooms connected directly to each other without hallways. So narrow, you could stretch your arms and touch both walls at the same time. These apartments might have 3 or 4 rooms total, with maybe one bathroom shared between multiple families. The kitchen might be so small that only one person could stand in it at a time. Privacy was a luxury few could afford. But the rent man didn't care about your cramped quarters or your low wages. He came knocking on the first of every month, hand extended, expecting his money regardless of whether you'd been able to find enough work to earn it, miss a payment, and you'd find your belongings on the street and another family moving into your place before the day was over. When that rent man came knocking and your pockets were as empty as your stomach after a long week of stretching meals, you did what black folks have always done throughout history. You got creative. You turned to your community. You transformed necessity into opportunity. House rent parties were a facet of Harlem life even before the Depression. Duke Ellington recalled, an outgrowth of parlor socials and church suppers held to raise funds for church needs. House rent parties aimed at helping dwellers of Harlem's railroad flats meet rent. The process of organizing a rent party was beautifully orchestrated. A masterclass in grassroots marketing and community organizing that would make modern event planners jealous. During the week leading up to the party, you'd spend your evenings handwriting dozens of invitation cards, each one a tiny work of art that combined advertising, poetry, and promises of good times. These cards were far more than simple invitations. They were miniature marketing campaigns, each one crafted to stand out in a sea of competition. You spend hours perfecting the wording, making sure your rhymes were catchy and your promises were enticing. We got yellow girls, we got black and tan. Will you have a good time? Yes, man. Or piano playing, gin drinking, jazz music, good eats. Come on down and move your feet. The cards were decorated with hand-drawn musical notes, dancing figures, or elaborate borders that showed off your artistic skills. Some hosts would use different colored inks or papers they'd scrounged from their workplace or borrowed from friends. The most creative cards became collector's items, passed from person to person as examples of the art form. But creating the cards was just the beginning. Getting them into the right hands required a network that would impress any modern marketing team. You'd slip these cards under apartment doors in the early morning hours before people left for work. You'd tuck them into the metal grills of elevator doors where everyone would see them. You'd hand them out personally on street corners during the evening rush, making eye contact and giving each person a personal invitation that made them feel special and wanted. Word spread through the unofficial communication networks that kept Harlem connected. Beauty salons were information exchanges where women shared gossip, news, and party invitations while getting their hair done. Barbershops served the same function for men, with rent party cards changing hands between shaves and haircuts. Church pews on Sunday morning were perfect for discreet card passing, with hosts making sure to invite the congregation's best dancers and biggest spenders. By Saturday night, everyone who mattered knew where the action was. But that was just the beginning of the competition. Drumming up a good crowd was important, for competition was fierce. As many as 12 parties in a single block and 5 in an apartment building simultaneously were not uncommon in Harlem during the 1920s. Can you imagine? 12 parties on a single block, all competing for the same crowd, each trying to outdo the other with better music, stronger drinks, and more exciting entertainment. You'd slip these cards under doors, tuck them into elevator grills, hand them out on street corners, and pass them to neighbors in the hallway. Word spread through beauty salons, barbershops, and church pews. By Saturday night, everyone knew where the action was. These parties, always held on Saturdays, which was payday, would often run well into the early hours of Sunday morning. Saturday was payday for most working folks, which meant Saturday night was when people had a few coins to spare for entertainment. Now, let's step inside one of these parties and experience what made them so magical. You climb 3 flights of narrow, creaking stairs, the sound of music growing louder and more infectious with each step you take. The stairwell is dim, lit only by a few bare bulbs that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The hallway smells like a symphony of scents: fried chicken crackling in hot oil, cigarette smoke curling through the air, sweet perfume, and something else. Something electric and alive that you can't quite name but can definitely feel. The walls seem to pulse with the rhythm of the music, and you can feel the vibrations of dancing feet through the floorboards beneath your shoes. Voices spill out from under doorways: laughter, conversation, the occasional shout of joy, or surprise from a winning hand of cards. You knock on the apartment door, and it swings open to reveal a world completely transformed from the daytime reality of cramped urban living. The host, dressed in their finest clothes, with a wide smile and welcoming arms, takes your 50 cents, a significant amount of money for most people, equivalent to several hours of wages, and stamps your hand or gives you a small ticket that marks you as a paying guest. Stepping inside is like entering a different universe. The living room furniture has been completely rearranged or removed entirely. Sofas and chairs are pushed against the walls to create maximum space for dancing. The floor, cleared of its usual rugs and obstacles, gleams under the light of decorative lamps, draped with colorful scarves that cast rainbow patterns across the room. And oh, how they dance. Bodies moved in ways that made the floorboards groan and creak under the collective weight of dozens of people swaying, stepping, and spinning to the rhythm. The Charleston was in full swing, with dancers kicking their legs and swinging their arms in wild, exuberant movements that seemed to defy gravity. The Lindy Hop had couples spinning and dipping in perfect synchronization, their movements so smooth they looked like they were floating. The Black Bottom had everyone dropping low and shaking with a rhythm that came from somewhere deep in their souls. The dancing was more than entertainment. It was expression, release, and rebellion all rolled into one. For people who spent their days bending to the will of employers, landlords, and a society that tried to diminish them, the dance floor was a place where they could be completely, authentically themselves. In the corner, squeezed behind an upright piano that took up nearly half the room, sits a musician who might just change the course of American music history. Maybe it's a young Thomas Fats Waller, barely 20 years old, but already possessed of fingers that could make those keys tell stories of heartbreak, joy, love, and loss with equal eloquence. His left hand walks up and down the bass notes like a man strolling confidently down the street, while his right hand dances across the treble keys like raindrops on a tin roof. Maybe it's James P. Johnson, already known as the father of stride piano, whose technique was so advanced that other musicians would travel from across the city just to watch his hands move. Johnson could make that piano sound like an entire orchestra, with bass lines that thundered like drums and melodies that soared like trumpets. Or perhaps it's a musician whose name history has forgotten, but whose influence was just as profound. One of the hundreds of talented pianists who made their living moving from party to party, carrying their music and their stories from apartment to apartment, building the sound that would eventually be known as stride piano, boogie woogie, and ultimately jazz itself. These parties had an immeasurable impact on the growth of jazz and blues music. This was where new techniques were born, where musical ideas were shared and evolved, where the competitive spirit of musicians pushed everyone to reach new heights of creativity and technical skill. The rent party circuit was like a musical university, where the curriculum was improvisation, and the graduation requirement was the ability to keep a room full of people dancing until dawn. The piano player was the undisputed king of the rent party scene because pianists were portable in a way that bands were not. A piano player could show up with nothing but their talent and their sheet music, squeeze behind whatever instrument the host had managed to fit into their apartment, and single-handedly provide the entertainment for the entire evening. They were paid by the host, usually a few dollars plus all the food and drink they could consume. But the real payment was the opportunity to play for audiences that appreciated good music and weren't shy about showing their approval. The kitchen is where the magic really happened. Women in their finest dresses served up plates of fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread, and sweet potato pie, all made from scratch, all sold by the plate to help make that rent money. The smell was intoxicating, a mixture of hot grease, fresh bread, and sweet spices that could make your mouth water from 3 blocks away. But it wasn't just food and music. In the back room, you might find a poker game where the stakes were high and the players were serious. Cards slapped against the table, coins clinked, and occasional shouts of victory or defeat punctuated the night. Dice games happened in corners, with players crouched in circles, shaking those ivory cubes like they were shaking their future. And the bootleg liquor, oh, the bootleg liquor. In this period, Harlem became known for rent parties, informal gatherings in which bootleg alcohol was served and music played. This was prohibition, remember, so every drop of alcohol was illegal. But that didn't stop the flow of gin, whiskey, and homebrewed corn liquor that burned going down and made everything seem possible. The drinks were served in teacups and coffee mugs to maintain the illusion of respectability, but everyone knew what was really in those cups. The apartment would be packed wall to wall with people, factory workers still in their work clothes, domestic workers in their Sunday best, jazz musicians in sharp suits, writers and artists, recent migrants from the South mixing with longtime city dwellers. The party was a melting pot of black experience, a place where a sharecropper's daughter could dance with a college graduate, where a Pullman porter could share a drink with a poet. What made these parties truly revolutionary wasn't just the money they raised, but the community they created. Neighbors paid to attend, and thus enabled the host to make his or her monthly rent. Though picturesque, these parties were thrown out of necessity. It was mutual aid disguised as entertainment, survival wrapped in celebration. The music was the heartbeat of it all. Piano players were the kings of rent parties because they could pack up and move easily from apartment to apartment. They'd play from memory, improvising, taking requests, sometimes playing for 12 hours straight. The music was raw, unfiltered, and absolutely electrifying. This was where stride piano was born, where boogie woogie found its groove, where jazz legends honed their craft. As the night wore on, the party would take on a life of its own. Couples would slip away to dark corners or empty bedrooms. Arguments would break out over card games or love interests. Someone might start crying from too much gin and too many memories of home. But mostly, people would dance and laugh and forget for just a few hours, the crushing weight of making it in a city that didn't want them. The host, meanwhile, would be calculating in their head 50 cents times 60 people, minus the cost of food and liquor, minus what they'd pay the piano player, would it be enough? Would they make rent this month? The anxiety was always there. Beneath the celebration, the knowledge that this was about survival, not just fun. Hughes noted that rent parties seemed to disappear after the Depression, but had returned in the post-war era. Maybe it is inflation today and the high cost of living that is causing the return of the pay at the door and buy your refreshments parties. Even Langston Hughes, the poet of the Harlem Renaissance, collected rent party cards as artifacts of this incredible cultural moment. By Sunday morning, the party would finally wind down. Empty plates would be stacked in the sink, cigarette butts would litter the floor, and the smell of bacon and coffee would begin to replace the lingering scent of gin and perfume. Neighbors would stumble home through the dawn light, some counting their winnings, others nursing hangovers and empty pockets. But the host would be counting something else entirely: the money that would keep them housed for another month, the community connections that would sustain them through hard times, and the memories of a night when their tiny apartment became the center of the universe. These rent parties weren't just about paying bills. They were about creating culture, building community, and proving that even in the face of discrimination and economic hardship, Black folks could create something beautiful, something joyful, something that would influence American culture for generations to come. The music that emerged from these cramped apartments would eventually fill concert halls. The dances that were born on these hardwood floors would be performed on Broadway stages. The sense of community forged in these spaces would fuel the civil rights movement decades later. What started as a desperate solution to an impossible housing crisis became one of the most important cultural movements in American history. Those tiny apartments in Harlem, packed with people who refused to let poverty dim their spirit, became the birthplace of sounds and styles that still move us today. The next time you hear jazz music, think about those rent parties. The next time you see people coming together to help a neighbor in need, remember that tradition was perfected in those Harlem apartments nearly a century ago. That's the power of Black ingenuity, the beauty of community, and the magic that happens when survival meets celebration. Thanks for joining me on this journey tonight. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below with the topic you'd like me to explore next. Your suggestions fuel these stories, and your support keeps this important history alive. Sweet dreams, and remember, we've always found a way to turn struggle into strength, necessity into art, and community into power. Until next time,